I'd like to introduce, first of all, Stephen Push from the families of September 11th.
Governor Kane, Congressman Hamilton, and the other members of the Commission, thank you for inviting me to offer my views about the Commission as it starts its investigation of the worst terrorist attack in American history. And thank you all for taking on this assignment. You're doing a tremendous service for your country. You have an extremely important task before you. What is at stake is nothing less than the legitimacy of the United States government. The primary function of government is to provide for the common defense. If the government cannot do that effectively, everything else it does is of little value. I would like to explain to you what it was that brought me before you today. I don't claim to speak for all of the 9/11 families, but I believe that many of them have similar views concerning the need for this commission. When my wife, Lisa Raines, was murdered aboard American Airlines Flight 77, I was immediately cast into a spiral of shock, disbelief, and grief. Within 2 weeks, however, my strongest emotion was anger. And I think I probably differ substantially from Mr. Weiser and Dr. Sincock in that. In fact, actually, anger is an inadequate word to describe what I felt. What I felt was a rage, so intense that it was like no emotion I'd ever felt before. But I haven't let go of this anger. I've tried to pour it into working to see that something like this never happens again. Initially, my rage was directed at the hijackers. Why did they do this? What did they expect to accomplish? What had Lisa done to them? But as I read the newspapers and spent night after sleepless night watching cable news networks and searching books and the web for information about terrorism, I also became angry at my government. The government that was supposed to protect Lisa, but that, I eventually learned, had failed her and the other 3,000 plus victims of 9/11. I learned, for instance, that 2 of the hijackers on Lisa's plane were known to the CIA. In fact, the CIA even knew that one of them had a multiple entry visa to come into the country, knew that they were associated, found out a little later on that they were associated with the people who bombed the Cole, the USS Cole, knew that they had attended a terrorism conference in Kuala Lumpur. Nevertheless, they were allowed to enter the country, to live here for months, and to board the plane using their own names. I also learned that for 14 years prior to 9/11, the Government Accounting Office repeatedly documented the ineffectiveness of the aviation security system. But during that 14-year period, nothing was done to correct the problems. I realized that al-Qaeda had first attacked America in 1993, declared war on America a few years later, and mounted a series of increasingly daring and deadly attacks. While all of this was happening, the Clinton administration took only ineffectual steps against al-Qaeda. And after all of these clear signs that we were at war with a ruthless enemy, the new Bush administration put counterterrorism on the back burner until September 11th. I am now convinced that this tragedy did not have to happen. 9/11 was foreseeable, and it could have been prevented. But even if you don't accept my word on that, I think everyone must admit that at the very least, 9/11 exposed serious problems with our counterterrorism and national security procedures. I'm not advocating conspiracy theories. I personally don't believe that anyone in government had specific knowledge of what would happen on 9/11. If only it were that simple. we could then easily correct the problem by investigating and punishing those responsible. But I fear that what we are up against is far more insidious. There has been a failure of leadership in this country that cuts across decades and political parties. Too many politicians put re-election above national security. Too many government managers favor process over results and careerism over service. I'm not maligning the many brave men and women who protect us. I have great respect and gratitude to those in the military and the intelligence agencies, and for the many others who have dedicated their lives to public service. But in too many cases, they have been poorly led. I'd like to make a comment about something that Mr. Benveniste and one of the other witnesses said about not pointing fingers. I think this commission should point fingers. I'm not suggesting that you find scapegoats, someone to hang out to dry. But there were people in responsible positions who failed us on 9/11. They didn't just fail us once. 9/11 occurred because they were failing us over a long period of time. Some of these people are still in responsible positions in the government. Perhaps they shouldn't be. And that's one of the things I think you need to look at and think about. I also hope that you will, in conducting your investigation, will talk to some of the rank and file in the agencies that you'll be looking at. I noticed that you have some people from the fire department and the police department speaking tomorrow. I don't know what level they're at, but you should speak to some of the rank and file in those departments and see if what the leaders are telling you squares with what the rank and file is telling you. The same goes for the federal agencies. I'm in touch with a number of former and current employees of the Federal Aviation Administration and the new Transportation Security Administration who have horror stories to tell about our aviation security. And I'd like you to listen to them. Maybe not everything they say is legitimate, but there's a lot there for you to look at that requires serious consideration. I'd also like to say something about what Mr. Weiser said about these commissions coming to naught in the end. If I have anything to say about it, that's not going to happen. Your report is not the end of the process, it's the beginning. And I think I can speak for some of the other families who are here today. We're not going away. We're going to see that your recommendations are translated into legislation, that the legislation is translated into effective action by the agencies. Since 9/11, there have been some important successes in the war on terrorism. Afghanistan has been liberated, Al-Qaeda has been disrupted, and many of Al-Qaeda's leaders have been captured. But there have been far too many failures as well. For example, despite expensive and highly publicized, the expensive and highly publicized creation of the Transportation Security Administration, aviation security is still little better than it was on 9/11. Just last month, an investigative journalist was able to defeat the carry-on bag screening process at a major American airport 10 out of 10 times. This is a year and a half after 9/11, months after the TSA has taken over responsibility for all of the airports, and an investigative journalist can carry unallowed items through security 100% of the time at a major American airport. And this is not just one instance. I just mentioned this one because it happened long after TSA had taken over. But I just this weekend watched a compilation tape of stories that were done by national and local television stations over the period, starting before 9/11 and continuing throughout the period when TSA was training and hiring and taking over, right up until last month, and in every single one of those instances, they were able to defeat the system between 50 and 100% of the time. I'll provide you with a copy of that tape. It's sickening. The TSA's response to this latest story, to this latest appalling failure rate, was to assert that, quote, proper screening procedures were followed, unquote. I'm sure the families of the next hijack victims will take great comfort in knowing that procedures were followed. These ineffectual reforms of transportation security focus almost exclusively on addressing past attacks, and this seems to be a recurring theme in the government. Let's respond to the last attack. Richard Reed uses a shoe bomb, so let's check everybody's shoes. Well, the terrorists are probably a little smarter than that, and probably next time it's not going to be shoes. But most of what's been done by the TSA so far responds to the threats that became evident on 9/11 and in the Pan Am 103 bombing over Lockerbie. Little has been done to address other aviation security issues, and these issues are well known. Little has been done to address threats to other modes of transportation. We have to do much more than prevent a repeat of prior terrorist attacks. We need people in government who know how to anticipate new tactics and develop methods to defeat them. Even more important, we need to understand and change the causes of terrorism. This will require a major change in the government's mindset. I urge you to look beyond al-Qaeda and beyond 9/11 and examine the underlying problems that this country has not fully faced and has done little to address. I urge you to ask the tough questions and offer tough solutions. For example, what changes need to be made in our foreign policy, especially in our relations with so-called friends such as Saudi Arabia? Does the new Department of Homeland Security really make America safer? Or has the government just reshuffled the boxes on the organizational chart? Can we obtain useful counterterrorism intelligence from an intelligence community made up of 14 different agencies when no one is in charge of the entire operation? Can the FBI, an agency steeped in a law enforcement culture, transform itself into a counterterrorism agency, or do we need to create an agency similar to Britain's MI5? Are political campaign contributions from the airlines undermining congressional oversight of aviation security? These are just a few of the questions you're going to need to answer. The list of questions is too long for this brief testimony. I know that other 9/11 families and many other people have provided you or can provide you with far more comprehensive lists. The 9/11 families aren't asking these questions for our own benefit. We have already been irreparably damaged. Our loved ones have already paid the ultimate price. We ask these questions for all Americans, for all people who may be the next victims of terrorism, for future generations. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and good luck in your search for the truth.